So when we look at the whole picture, we have to think about what specific things are important for India within this story. But I will start with 2 points. First, I would like to ask a question that if you look at the presence of the global actors within the Silk Road space, and I can reel out data, I can reel out a lot of information, but let me give you just something small. So if you look at Uzbekistan, if you look at Kazakhstan, just take those 2 countries because they're the larger of the economies, perhaps the largest economies, but also large natural resource bases, which are globally important. We see that there are about 600 or 700 American companies operating in Kazakhstan. There are about 500 or so plus in Uzbekistan. We see 400, 500 German companies present. We see Japanese, and we see the British also very much present. Then you look at other Eastern countries, be it China, Korea, and Japan. If you compare to that whole outlay, we see India has perhaps, depending on how you count, between 20 or 30 companies in Kazakhstan, maybe only 8 or 9 in Uzbekistan. Often the discussion that is put on the table is that, oh, it's not simple for India, that our land routes, the traditional historical conduits of connection, have been inhibited by wars, by diplomatic, let's say, discord. How do you do trade with Uzbekistan, Tajikistan when you have a war going on in the middle, the tensions between India and Pakistan? That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that the US, the Germans, the Japanese do not have a border, do not have any such, the national connectivity doesn't lie with them as well. So why are they present? And the companies, if they are present for such a number of years, they certainly are making profit, or at least have potential to do so. They're not there for charity. I'm ignoring the government and the NGOs and so on. I'm just looking at this angle for the moment. Yeah? So that's the backdrop against which we evaluate certain other things. There is, of course, an overwhelming presence of China. We think, again, in terms of its political control of the region's resources, its politics, and its limiting nature. And India reacts to that. Yeah? And what we have seen, a psychosis developing, and I'm going to be quite blunt about it, that how India has shifted from being a potential player in this game, be it a great game or with all its connotations, to a protester of this game being there at all, yeah? While being a passionate player in the game. And I cannot necessarily comment on what is the deep thinking and the anxieties that exist within Indian system, but I can comment on the fact that the capacity being both political will, economic will, and the knowledge to act have become diffuse and disconnected. So while we are an important player in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, while we are a dialogue partner with the Eurasian Economic Union, these are large, those of you who are not familiar with these acronyms. So we have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which initially is seen as a China-led organization, but it was only signed in China, though China is a big player. It's an organization which brings together countries ranging from all the 5 countries of Central Asia, but also India, Pakistan, Iran, Mongolia, even Sri Lanka into it. So often it's talked about in the Western press and increasingly in the Indian context as a security organization, something like an anti-NATO organization. But if you look at the list of those countries, you immediately realize that they do not have a standard or similar or even converging security stance. So something different is in their minds when they're joining it and how they functionalize that. And that's the point gets missed out. So having laid down this complex and perhaps not necessarily positive backdrop of the story, I would like to say that, okay, what are, as you asked me more directly the question, what are the possibilities for India to be trading with the region? And I would first of all give a brief CV of opportunities. And I'm going to use this by actually mentioning Kazakhstan, because it's the easiest to define. It's a country which is larger than 10% larger than Western Europe. It is the 10th or 11th largest oil-producing country in the world. It has the 3rd largest uranium reserves in the world. It is the 6th largest wheat producer in the world. Its overall population is only 17 million. Coming from UK, we say size of London, which is sitting on these resources.
Size of Delhi.
Where you, you know, so that amount of people and that amount of resources, what is the potential? Similar numbers, perhaps slightly modified, can be talked about Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan and so on. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan are being relatively, say, weaker economies, but potential there lies too. So given that, what is there? So China, the US, the Russians, the Germans, and the European Union and other organizations have put up there what they have to offer, what they want to offer. Yeah? In finance, in political support, Kazakhstan is a big player now at the moment in UN Security Council, being the first, but also in OSCE and other organizations. So China, on the other hand, is building the infrastructure. No one invested in infrastructure in Central Asia. After the Soviet collapse, the trains, planes, and automobiles all stopped moving around, not because they didn't have them, but because there were no service industry, there was no infrastructure in terms of transport side of things. So, all right, so they have got all of that. Everybody's got something to do. Where do we sit as Indians? Well, we have a great resonance in the region. Anywhere you walk into the region, and we had discussions with colleagues, others, whether it's our film industry, whether it's our music, but generally the overall cultural outreach has a huge potential, which remains a potential, rather than it goes anywhere. So I wanted to address that, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, coming back to answering it. One of the big things where India can partner and should partner, which does not require border trade, which does not require going through conflict zones, which does not require military, which has to do with human capital development. And human capital development in this region is also uniquely placed. These are former Soviet countries. 20 years ago, they were at the top of the world. Indians used to go and study there, to be trained as doctors, engineers, and in other fields and so on. However, now, given the fact that 25 years of, let's say, economic crisis, policies and so on have created a space for India, which is the nearest globally connected with a talent resource. Central Asians have not also realized the fact that we supply a large chunk of the global talent, global labor, that aspect. So I'm not talking about actually sending a lot of people there to work, because that's not what would be successful, but building the ties which are easier to do, both in terms of business, in terms of amount of money, whether it's training petroleum experts to mining on one side, but more digital things, which are the theme of this meeting, digital connectivity is immense. These are the things where we can provide, and we have here in India and South Asia chance to make a lot of money, to be crass about it. I will not put that into fancy business terms. There is money which we can access because the governments, they value human capital development despite anything else. The first things they do after independence, despite being very poor, they put up a lot of funding up front for human capital development. They knew this could be an issue. That's one thing. The second thing is Now, this may sound crazy, but it is true. Central Asia and Silk Road countries' traditional partners have been, of course, Russia as Soviet Union. After 99 ruble crisis, the space was filled more and more by Chinese, and indeed, Western, European, Korean, and Japanese presence is there. But what they produce there, what exists there naturally, is of only limited interest. Somebody wants oil, somebody wants uranium, somebody wants something else, cotton, and so on. Now here is a very bold statement which I like to be challenged, but I have enough data to say that I'm confident. India today, right now, can buy every single thing produced in every single Central Asian country outright. And our buying power, which we were discussing with Jerry yesterday, is something that is not understood or put up front. Why so? Because culturally and the way our economies are structured, we have an advantage. Many things they produce are not of interest to other countries, even Chinese and Russians, but to us. For example, here in India, perhaps you had some biscuits out there. There are pistachios and almonds in those biscuits. They come from California or somewhere else, Iran or Spain. While Central Asia is the largest producer, historical producer. Everyone knows about Kabuliwala, if you're Indian, and how Afghan traders used to bring Central Asian nuts into our households. That's all missing, but now this can move to a different level. That's micro and macro level of engagement. And not to keep going on, but I would say there is a last part in the list of these things, which I have a long list of, but it's important to engage with that. It's not all about competition. It's about complementarity. What thus Russia can offer to Central Asia, what China can offer to Central Asia, what we can offer to Central Asia are actually synergetic and complementary. And so our unique selling point, based on things which others are not doing, is extremely important. While, in a way, again to be crass, the world is making money off this route, so-called the Silk Road, and we are caught up in protesting whether they are making the money. What is our play into the game? And I think it is very much possible, but remains only as a potential rather than practice.
So it remains in a trap,
Yes.
a trap. While digital connectivity is a means of connecting the minds and the people and the countries, and increasingly so. What is important in particular, given the natural resources in this region, and you talked about Germany, you talked about US, obviously US is far, but Germany is in the Eurasian, an extension of the Eurasian landmass, right? The biggest impediment that India has is the lack of connectivity, right? And to overcome that lack of connectivity, we are trying to put in place something called International North-South Corridor, Transportation Corridor, which was scheduled to open last month, couldn't open because there was no load factor from here to that region. We had also sort of tried to put in place Chabahar Port, with both for strategic significance as well as to access to Afghanistan. But both are game changers for the region, right? And game changers from an Indian viewpoint, right? Do you think that, is there a time to come for us, India, to overcome certain hesitations, in terms of Iran coming under renewed pressure from US, and therefore India going slow with Iran, right? It went slow for many years, even earlier also. It was only 2015 that we had sort of started things moving. Some payment has been done, to develop the Chabahar port, but it remains in a very, very, very slow-moving vehicle. So does the International North-South Transportation Corridor, although dry run has taken place in the last. So if other countries, the countries in Europe, and they are, particularly in Germany, they were planning to join the INSTC corridor. China, which also has business with that, most of the Chinese firms are exposed to the Americans, and willing to move ahead. Why can't we, move out of our hesitation and push these, There's a political push. Prime Minister went to all the 5 Central Asian countries. Why can't we now get things on the ground and, not just look at load factor, but, put infrastructure in place, which can be of dual use in future. Many infrastructure in the world are dual use.
Yes.
So what sort of inhibits India in terms of, pushing ahead with this connectivity? And, I would also link Oman into this. The Prime Minister is traveling to Oman on Sunday and Monday. Oman is offering India a role in the Duqm port. Duqm is a deep sea port, and there are plans to connect the Duqm port with Chabahar port. And Oman is a country which enjoys goodwill across the board, right? So if there are countries which had a particular orientation for years, are now willing to take play a role, inviting India. How long can we be hesitant in this? Yeah, and these are some of the projects. Doesn't need big amount of money, which for which we need to hold on for years.
It's extremely important point, but it's setting the problem, which is important. That these things are being done, and why our inertia is so. And inertia comes from several directions, but one particularly. The one very interesting thing to think about is what I just said. And you mentioned the load factor.
Yeah.
Load factor depends on what you want to buy and sell, what you want to transport. Right? We don't have a clarity of that. When you said Germany and other countries and so on, they have a clarity of what they want. There's an on-ground understanding of what particular engagement processes are needed. I'll give you one very recent talk I heard. In London, there's something called UK Turkmenistan Trade and Industry Council meeting, in which number of companies, to my surprise, so of course BP and Shell were there. There was also Rolls-Royce present, Rolls-Royce engines, aircraft engines and so on. Turkmenistan is a small country. Of course it has huge resources, particularly in gas, one of the top players in the world and so. What I found out during this meeting, that both BP and Shell have offices in Turkmenistan for the last 20 years. However, they have not produced they trade, but they don't produce any oil and gas. Yeah? So, but they have a vision to be present. They know the time will come and they need to build ties and build pathways through which things can happen. Which is again the fact that why BP and Shell are sitting literally 1 hour flight away from Delhi and doing this, and ONGC isn't. Right? So again, the clarity of what you want to build these corridors and you want to link everything to everything, but that's only sustainable if something will travel on that and you know what you want to do on it. Yeah. So that is a big issue. Again, stating problems is not what else can be done. And I've said this actually previously in this forum. We need to think beyond that. So what can we do? And I do go back now to technology and the digital side of things and so. The global industry is facing, global industry of any variety has one limitation, a bottleneck. It relies on digital technology. Digital technology relies on a single material called silicon. And silicon has brought us many great things, but has also been the biggest player in bringing us the global energy crisis and environmental crisis. It has, and I don't have time here to go into detailing that, but we can discuss that later. Time has come for us to consider a post-silicon era in which other materials offer similar or better functionality. The global thinking, whether you're in Cambridge or Harvard or Stanford or Heidelberg or Tokyo or Singapore, and maybe marginally sometimes in some Indian universities, you will find that the answer is that the current answers lie with rare earths. Rare earths are seen as a very politically important things, but they're also very energetically important and technologically important elements. Central Asia has large amounts of these elements or deposits. But these deposits are just deposits. Central Asians don't benefit from them because they can extract them and sell them as commodities. There is no value add happening. Propositions are that can there be a global connectivity in which Western giants of academia are able to functionalize their intellectual property on rare earths using the resources in Central Asia, and they can use India as a base for production of actual products which can, using India's global supply chain, can actually take benefit of it. In this story, China is less important. US is also less important. US and China are heavily invested in silicon technology. For them to disrupt this production and create a new production line, it would be very difficult in terms of both jobs, their economic supply chain, and so on. And India is less so. It's not. So it has a place to act. Yeah. So when we talk about the Silk Road and India's place in it, we need to think about not just region, not about the barriers, but about global supply chains and global value chains and how we place ourselves in it and how we can benefit and have a mutual connection across the countries.
I think we have to, guess we have to wrap up soon.
Sure.
So, where do you see Eurasia in next 25 years? You know, by the time some of the current leadership in these countries, which has ruled since the inception, will be gone, right? Kyrgyzstan is already a more vibrant polity compared to others. We find in Uzbekistan new promises. Tajikistan also has a person who will also be Tajikistan, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan. Where do you see Eurasia in the next 25 years henceforth? You know, where do you see in the global in terms of political governance, in terms of global integration, in terms of the regional integration?
I can make a romantic glib start to answering that question very briefly. It's more or less like the era when we used to think seas divided us till we built a technology to go across them, and they became our main source of connectivity. In fact, they have been for as long as we can think, but there was also an era when they were the barrier. So how the landmass within Eurasia connects, I see very quick three things. First off is the theme that I've been pushing, the economic side of things. How does Eurasia act in complementarity? How there is a clear idea that you have countries of Central Asia which have resources. You have Russia at the top, which has a very strong place in global order in machine building and heavy industry. You have China in light manufacturing and household penetration. And India, again, with its high technology, intellectual capital. These things coming together is forming Eurasia, in real sense as an actor. Second point is more what you defined. What we have seen in last year, for the first time, Eurasia and Central Asia to be real places. 25 years ago, when these things separated from Soviet Union, their political place was very much that they were trying to define as to who they were. Each country was trying to be not Soviet, but not each other, but what, again, your own unique selling point. Yeah? So their maturity and placing themselves in global order has both the political as well as their economic activity coming together. So my favorite analogy is that in the West, things when they come together are seen as melting pot. This is a very famous analogy. But Central Asia is different. It's a salad bowl in which you have things which come together. They're distinct, but they do have a collective meaning and taste. And that's the crux of how I see Eurasia emerging. And finally, the last thing about Eurasia is that Eurasia being, what is Euro part of Eurasia and what is Asian part of Asia gets continually redefined. Right. So that's the challenge part of it. How those things keep connected and build the relationships is where we cannot predict. Yeah.
Thank you so much.